The restaurant was built for people who thought the world belonged to them. Velvet curtains muffled the noise of the city, chandeliers glowed with golden fire, and every table brimmed with crystal goblets and imported wine. In that kind of place, you didn't notice the staff. You weren't supposed to. Waitresses were shadows, filling glasses, clearing plates, silent ghosts who moved around the real players. That night, Hoa Karen was one of those shadows, or at least, that's what everyone thought. She walked the floor with a tray balanced on one hand, her black and white uniform wrinkled from hours of work. Her shoes squeaked faintly against the polished marble, each sound a reminder of how worn they were, how many shifts they had endured. Her hair was pulled back into a low, messy bun, strands falling loose around her face. To the powerful men and women seated at the long mahogany table, she was nothing more than background noise, a servant meant to disappear into the candlelight. They didn't know her name. They didn't care. At the head of the table sat Alexander Blackwood, a billionaire whose name alone shifted markets. 33 years old, with dark hair slicked back and a jawline that looked carved from steel, he had the reputation of a man who destroyed rivals with a single phone call. Tonight, his pen hovered above a contract worth billions, the kind of deal that could tilt entire industries. His lawyers flanked him, briefcases yawning open, pages spread like weapons on a battlefield. Across from him, two foreign partners smiled too tightly, their tailor jackets gleaming beneath the chandelier light. Karen poured wine into a glass, her hands steady, though her chest felt tight. She had overheard enough while moving between tables, numbers so large they made her stomach twist. She wasn't meant to understand, not in their eyes. She was invisible. And yet, every word they spoke reminded her of a world she once belonged to. A world of case law, late nights buried in textbooks, contracts she could slice open like puzzles. That was before her brother's accident, before the hospital bills dragged her out of law school and into a life of serving food to the very people she used to dream of standing beside. Laughter cut through her thoughts. Richard, one of the older lawyers, leaned back in his chair, eyes crawling over her uniform and scuffed shoes. She probably couldn't even read a utility bill, he sneered, his voice loud enough to make others laugh. The sound rippled down the table, cruel and careless. Karen lowered her head, but her eyes stayed sharp, fixed on the stack of papers lying before Alexander. She placed the glass down carefully, as though setting a piece of herself on the table. They saw a servant. They didn't see the storm gathering behind her silence. The pen glided into Alexander Blackwood's hand with the inevitability of a blade descending. The room hushed as he leaned forward, ready to seal the deal that would echo through headlines the next morning. Lawyers shifted with predatory satisfaction. Foreign partners exchanged thin, victorious smiles. Waitstaff froze at the edges of the dining room, their eyes lowered, their movements slowed, as if the signing of this contract were some sacred ritual not to be interrupted. But Hoa Karen didn't move. Her tray balanced at her side, her breath caught in her chest. She saw the way his hand hovered above the signature line, and every instinct in her screamed. Without thinking, without even realizing her lips had parted, she leaned closer and whispered, "Stop. Don't sign." The words sliced through the quiet like glass breaking. For a moment, no one understood what had happened. Then laughter erupted, raw and vicious. Richard, the comb-over lawyer, slapped the table, nearly spilling his wine. "A waitress," he choked between gasps of amusement. "A waitress thinks she knows better than a room of lawyers?" The table roared. Some clutched their stomachs, others shook their heads with pitying smirks, their laughter rolling over her like a wave of fire. Claire, the polished businesswoman with diamonds glinting on her wrist, leaned back in her chair and smirked. "What? Does she think she's one of us now?" Her voice was pure venom, sugar stripped away. Beside her, Ethan, the young lawyer with too much ambition and too little experience, smirked broadly. "Maybe she's hoping for a tip big enough to buy better shoes." He pointed at Karen's feet, and the table cackled harder, the noise swelling into cruelty. Karen's jaw tightened, her tray trembling slightly in her hands, but not from fear. She placed a glass of wine slowly, deliberately, like staking her presence on the polished wood. She didn't answer them. She didn't bow. Her silence became sharper than their laughter. "Enough," said Margaret, a venture capitalist at the far end of the table. She didn't laugh. Instead, she scolded Karen as though she were a child. "You're standing too close. It's unprofessional. Don't you people train for this?" Her words carried the weight of authority, and others nodded in agreement, murmuring approval. Karen wiped a single drop of wine from the tablecloth, stepped back with precision, and met Margaret's eyes. For the briefest second, the older woman flinched under the steadiness of her gaze. "Throw her out," demanded Klaus, one of the foreign partners, his accent heavy with disdain. His partner Victor nodded sharply, his gold chain glinting under the chandelier. The manager, Tom, scrambled forward, his face flushed with panic. He seized Karen's arm, hissing loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're destroying your career. Get out, now." The bodyguard, a mountain in a tailored suit, stepped closer, his hand brushing his earpiece. The room buzzed like a hive of wasps, each voice rising, insults piling, orders clashing. And then Alexander spoke. His pen tapped against the table once, twice, the sound as sharp as a gavel. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of command. "Let her speak." The laughter stopped like a knife cut it in half. Glasses stilled midair. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum quieter. All eyes turned toward Karen. Her pulse thudded, but her hands didn't tremble. She set her tray down on a side table, reclaiming her space. The lawyers sneered. The foreign partners seethed. The manager's mouth hung open. But Karen stood straighter, her voice steady, her words deliberate. "You're about to sign away your empire," she said softly, but the silence made her words thunder. "Appendix 14B technology rights transfer. No safeguards. It's a trap." Gasps rippled around the table. Ethan fumbled through the contract, his fingers clumsy. Richard went pale, his smirk collapsing into a grimace. Victor's smile cracked, and Klaus gripped his napkin until it tore. Karen didn't move, didn't flinch, her finger resting above the line on the paper like she was daring them all to see. And Alexander stopped breathing for a beat. The silence stretched so long it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The glittering chandeliers swayed slightly, casting fractured light over the table, catching on the edges of the unsigned contract like a warning. Alexander's pen hovered above the paper, his dark eyes locked on Karen. Around him, the room trembled with disbelief. Richard broke first. His voice cracked as he barked, "This is absurd. She's a waitress. She doesn't even know what she's talking about." He shoved his chair back, trying to regain control with bluster, but the veins on his forehead betrayed him. Ethan's hands shook as he flipped page after page, desperate to prove her wrong. His smug grin had evaporated, leaving only the sheen of sweat on his temples. "No, no, she can't be right," he muttered, but his fingers betrayed him, stalling when they landed on the clause. Appendix 14B stared back at him like a snake waiting to strike. His lips parted, the blood draining from his face. She's right." The words fell into the air like stones into deep water. Victor swore under his breath in his native tongue, his gold chain trembling against his chest as his anger rose. Klaus slammed his palm against the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "This is an insult. You let a server," he spat, "interrupt a billion-dollar contract? Throw her out now." The manager, Tom, tugged at Karen's arm again, panic written all over his face. His career flashed before his eyes in the reflection of Alexander's silence. "Karen, please. You don't understand what you've just done." But Alexander wasn't looking at Tom. He wasn't even looking at the furious foreign partners. His gaze was fixed on Karen, searching, probing, measuring. Her chest rose and fell slowly, but her voice didn't waver. "Section 337 of the U.S. Tariff Act," she continued, her words like arrows loosed in rapid fire. "It prohibits unfair trade practices, including forced technology transfers without safeguards. That clause isn't enforceable. If you sign, you'll bleed out your own empire, and no court will protect you." A tremor passed through the room. Margaret, the venture capitalist, leaned forward, her sharp bob-framing eyes that suddenly looked less confident. Sylvia, the financial advisor, let out a brittle laugh, too shrill, too forced. "She's parroting something she overheard. She can't possibly—" But her words trailed off under the weight of Karen's steady gaze. Karen didn't need to defend herself with anger. Her silence, her stillness, was defense enough. But behind that composure, her mind spun. She hadn't spoken from recklessness. She had spoken from memory. The years at law school came rushing back. The late nights in the library, her professors praising her sharp mind, telling her she had the instincts of someone born to dismantle contracts. She remembered her mother's voice on the phone. "Keep going, Karen. You're going to change the world." And then her brother's accident. The call that shattered her future. The hospital bills stacked like mountains. The funeral that drained what little they had. She dropped out, left her textbooks in a cardboard box, and put on a waitress uniform. 2 years had passed. Every tray she carried, every table she cleaned, was a reminder of a life she thought had died with her brother. But tonight, standing in the glare of chandeliers, with the eyes of billionaires and sharks on her, that old life surged back like fire in her blood. She hadn't lost her knowledge. She hadn't lost herself. She had buried it until now. Richard slammed his fist on the table, desperate to regain ground. "This is slander. She's making a spectacle of herself. You can't—" Alexander cut him off with a single raised hand. The billionaire's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of command. "If she's wrong, she leaves this room unemployed. If she's right, she stays." The ultimatum fell like thunder. The lawyers froze. Tom's face went white. Even the bodyguard paused mid-step, his hands still hovering above Karen's shoulder. Ethan finally looked up from the pages, his lips trembling. "She's correct," he whispered. No one laughed now. The only sound was the clink of a glass shifting as Margaret set hers down with a shaking hand. Karen's heart pounded, but her eyes never left Alexander. She had spoken out of turn, broken every rule of service, risked everything she had left, and still her voice had not betrayed her. For the first time that evening, Alexander Blackwood leaned back in his chair, studying her not as a waitress, not as a servant, but as something else entirely. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The chandeliers above flickered faintly, as if the electricity itself hesitated. Every eye in the room was fixed on Alexander Blackwood. His pen lay idle on the table, half forgotten, while Karen stood a few steps away, her chest rising and falling with quiet resolve. Then, in one sudden motion, Alexander reached for the contract. Papers rustled sharply. For an instant, it looked as though he might sign after all. Victor smirked. Klaus's jaw tightened. Richard straightened, as if victory was within reach. The bodyguard's hand hovered, waiting for the order to drag Karen out. But Alexander didn't sign. He tore the contract clean down the middle. The rip of paper split the air like thunder. Gasps erupted. Margaret's eyes widened, her composure cracking. Claire's lips parted in shock, her diamond bracelet clinking against the table as her hand fell limp. Ethan dropped his pen, the metallic clang echoing across the silence. Richard's face drained of blood, his mouth opening and closing without sound, like a fish floundering on dry land. "You'll regret this," Victor shouted, his voice trembling with rage. He shot to his feet, chair screeching against the marble. Klaus followed, slamming his fist on the table. "This is insanity." Alexander didn't even look at them. His eyes stayed locked on Karen. "I'd rather trust the instinct of a stranger," he said evenly, "than sign my own death warrant." The words hit like a hammer. For the first time that night, the power had shifted. The room, once so eager to laugh, now sat paralyzed, each guest calculating the consequences of underestimating the woman in the worn uniform. Richard tried to rally. "She's nothing, a dropout, a failure." His voice cracked under the weight of the silence. Karen didn't move. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was dismantling him. Claire leaned forward, her false smile gone, her tone sharp. "You can't be serious, Alexander. You're jeopardizing everything by listening to her." Her words dripped with venom, but the desperation beneath them was plain. Alexander turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the table like a blade. "Everything? She just saved me from losing billions. Tell me, what exactly did you save me from tonight?" His voice was cold steel. No one answered. Tom, the manager, found his courage in fury. His face blotched red. He jabbed a finger at Karen. "You've humiliated this establishment. You're finished." He grabbed her shoulder to shove her toward the exit. Before anyone could blink, Alexander's voice boomed, sharp enough to freeze Tom mid-motion. She's not going anywhere. The manager's hand fell away instantly, his face going pale. His career had just died in front of him, and everyone knew it. Alexander rose from his chair. His height, his presence, transformed the atmosphere. He didn't raise his voice, but every syllable carried like a verdict. From this moment forward, he declared, Hoa Karen is my special legal advisor. The room exploded not with sound, but with silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Margaret's jaw slackened. Claire's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. Ethan sank lower into his chair, shame flooding his expression. Even the bodyguard stepped back, unsure, his orders overturned by a voice stronger than money. Karen's breath caught. For a moment, her mind went blank. Advisor? The word didn't seem real. 2 years of wiping tables, swallowing insults, hiding the law student she used to be, and now, in a single night, the man everyone feared had dragged her into the light. Her fingers brushed the edge of her apron unconsciously, grounding herself. She forced her breath steady. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of them. Alexander looked at his team of lawyers, Richard, Ethan, Sylvia, George, and his expression hardened further. She saw what you didn't. She saved this empire when you were ready to sell it off piece by piece. And you, his eyes cut to Richard like blades, laughed at her. No one dared reply. Across the table, Laura, a silent partner who hadn't spoken all evening, finally rose. Her voice trembled but carried a strange clarity. We owe her an apology, she said softly. Her eyes flicked toward Karen. We all do. No one echoed her. But the words settled heavy in the room, undeniable like the echo of a verdict. Karen straightened her shoulders, her silence once again, speaking louder than any insult. The balance of power had shifted forever. The aftershocks rippled through the room long after Alexander Blackwood's declaration. Glasses sat untouched, wine warming in crystal bowls. The once booming laughter had vanished, replaced by a brittle, suffocating quiet. Everyone felt the ground beneath them shift, but none more violently than those who had mocked. Richard, the senior lawyer who had sneered the loudest, slumped in his chair. His face was gray, sweat gathering along his hairline. He fumbled with his papers, stuffing them into his briefcase, as though hiding the evidence of his own failure. Alexander's words, she saw what you didn't, rang in his ears like a death knell. Within days, the fallout would come. Alexander pulling his accounts from Richard's firm, the whispers spreading through corporate corridors, clients slipping away. That night was the beginning of the end of his empire, and he knew it. Claire's diamond bracelet clinked softly as she crossed her arms. Her composure cracked wide open. Her mind raced faster than her pulse. She had spent years curating her image, building sponsorships, weaving her way into every glittering guest list, but her words, mocking a waitress, belittling her shoes, had not stayed contained in that gilded room. Someone had recorded them, and by the following morning, social media would ignite. Screens across the city would loop her cruel smirk, her dismissive tone. Sponsors would call it bad optics. Invitations would dry up. The world she fought to climb would spit her out. Ethan, the young lawyer who had pointed at Karen's scuffed shoes with glee, stared blankly at the contract's torn halves. His career had only just begun, yet humiliation had already marked him. His demotion came swiftly, not publicly, but just as sharp. The office chatter that once fed his ego now became whispers behind his back. He had wanted to prove himself as the clever one at the table. Instead, he became the cautionary tale. Victor and Klaus fumed in their seats. Rage simmered under their expensive suits, but the humiliation was permanent. Their billion-dollar deal lay in shreds at their feet. The headlines back home would not be kind. The foreign press would call it a disaster, a failure of judgment. Their carefully sculpted reputations would fracture. They rose, gathering their coats, muttering curses under their breath. They left the restaurant under the weight of defeat, their departure more telling than any words. And then there was Tom, the manager. His hands still trembled as he stood frozen near the side table, the imprint of Alexander's command echoing in his skull. She's not going anywhere. He had tried to shove Karen out, had dared to put his hands on her. Now his fate was sealed. The call would come from the restaurant's owner within the week. Quiet, curt, and final. Tom's career would end in the same silence that now pressed against the walls. Karen remained still, her apron folded neatly at her waist, her breath steadying. She had not spoken again after Alexander's declaration. She didn't need to. The room had already been remade by her words. The faces around her told the story: disbelief, shame, panic, defeat. For years, she had been invisible, a shadow gliding from table to table. Tonight, her silence carried more weight than their entire chorus of mockery. As the room emptied, foreign partners storming out, lawyers slinking away, investors averting their eyes, Karen quietly retrieved her tray. The clink of glass against silver rang sharp in the hush. She moved as she always had, efficient, steady, unassuming. But everyone who saw her now felt the difference. The way her shoulders squared, the way her eyes no longer dipped. She was no longer the help they could laugh at. She was the woman who had stopped the signing of a billion-dollar mistake. In the days that followed, the ripple effect grew louder. Richard's downfall made headlines in the business journals. Claire's social media scandal exploded across timelines, her sponsors vanishing one by one. Ethan's demotion was whispered in law offices as a warning. Victor and Klaus returned home to fractured reputations. Tom disappeared from the restaurant staff, his absence never acknowledged but deeply noted. And Karen? She returned to work the next evening. Her uniform was the same, her shoes still scuffed, but something fundamental had shifted. The other staff noticed first the way she carried herself, the calm in her silence. Customers who once snapped their fingers at her now hesitated, their tone softer, their eyes lingering with a trace of caution, even respect. Miguel, the busboy who had dropped a glass that night, nodded to her differently now, like he was standing beside someone larger than life. Karen didn't boast. She didn't tell the story. She simply poured wine, wiped tables, carried trays. Yet every step she took was heavier with meaning. She had spoken once in a room that wanted her silenced. She had been mocked, belittled, dismissed, and she had stood her ground. The price of mockery had been paid in full. The restaurant returned to its rhythm. In the days that followed, clinking glasses, murmurs of conversation, the smell of seared steak drifting from the kitchen. But for those who had been present the night Hoa Karen spoke, the air would never feel the same. Karen moved among the tables as always, balancing trays, refilling wine. Yet her steps carried a quiet certainty now. Where once her gaze fell to the floor, it now lingered just a little longer, unflinching. Where once she blended into shadows, she now seemed to draw light toward her. Other servers whispered when she passed, their eyes following, as if she had become more than one of them, something closer to a legend. A week later, the letter came. Heavy cream paper sealed with wax, the emblem of Alexander Blackwood's empire pressed into the surface. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Inside, an offer, a formal position, a real salary, a title with weight. Her throat tightened as she read the words again and again. She didn't show anyone. She folded the letter neatly, slid it into her worn leather bag, and went back to work. That night, Alexander returned not flanked by lawyers or guards, but alone. He sat at a small table in the corner, a glass of water before him. Karen noticed him but kept working, her tray steady. When she finally approached, she placed a glass down, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you." Alexander nodded once, his expression unreadable, yet softer than she had ever seen. No one else noticed. No one else needed to. That moment belonged to them. Others began to notice her differently too. Henry, a quiet regular who usually buried himself in newspapers, stopped her as she cleared his plate. His voice was low, steady. "What you did, most people wouldn't have had the courage. I'm proud of you." Karen froze, her hands stilling on the tray. She met his gaze, her throat thick. A small smile broke across her face, fragile, but real. She nodded once, unable to form words. Henry returned to his paper, but his words lingered like a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Miguel, the young busboy, whispered to her one evening as they polished glasses. "You changed everything," he said, awe glowing in his eyes. She only shook her head, pressing a finger to her lips, a silent reminder. It wasn't about glory. It was about truth. For Karen, nothing outward had changed. She still tied her apron strings each shift, still felt the ache in her feet by midnight. But inside, something had ignited. The flame she thought had died with her brother's accident burned again, fierce, steady, unyielding. She walked through the restaurant like a woman who knew she belonged. Not as a waitress, not even as Alexander's advisor, but as herself. Message. The world had tried to bury her with laughter, to crush her beneath condescension and silence. They called her invisible, mocked her shoes, her place, her worth. But in one moment of courage, she turned the room upside down. For anyone who has ever been overlooked, pushed aside, or told they don't belong, this is your story too. You don't need wealth, power, or a title to carry truth. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to speak when everyone expects you to stay silent. Hoa Karen didn't just save a billionaire that night, she saved herself. She reclaimed the voice she thought she had lost. And so can you. Keep walking forward, head high. The world may laugh, but one day they will listen. One day they will see you.